so good to be with you this evening to share my testimony. My goodness, it's so good. You'll never know how much all of you mean to Lucky and me. But tonight I wanted to mention that I was born exactly 80 years today. I lived in South Alabama and enjoyed doing what young boys like to do: fish, hunt, and visit with friends and family. My best friend was Joel back home, and we lived near to one another there in Dothan, Alabama. We enjoyed our times of doing all we could as young boys in our frequent visits together. I recall when I was 14, Joel asked me to go with him and his family to church one Sunday morning. That was Headland Avenue Baptist Church, located about 2 miles from our homes. I didn't know much about church, but if Joel enjoyed going, I figured I would enjoy doing that as well. Right away, I enjoyed being right there in the Sunday school class that Joel attended. The class had a teacher. His name was Mr. Moss. I'll never forget him. And he really cared for all of us young boys. He told us interesting stories he had experienced as a young man growing up. He would use those stories to apply to the Sunday school lesson about living for the Lord. He had a tire business in town and knew a lot about cars, which was interesting to all of us. He said he drove cars recklessly as a young man. He mentioned to us once about what would have happened to him if a certain part of the car he was driving one night failed. He told that if a 10-cent fuse in the headlight circuit failed while he was driving recklessly at high speed, it would have caused him to lose control of the car and wreck, possibly killing him. He said he was trusting his life to a 10-cent fuse instead of to the Lord. That had a real impact on me and my young life. He indicated how the Lord got him through many dangerous situations that could have been very bad for him. He structured those stories to apply them to our lives and talk about salvation through Jesus Christ. After the Sunday school lesson, we would go into the main auditorium to hear the sermon from the pastor, Brother O.G. Hall. I'll never forget him. He was a real man of God. I do not recall how long I had been going to church, but apparently the Lord had opened my ears and I started hearing the pastor, like Mr. Moss, speak about knowing Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. What I heard intrigued me to know more about what it meant to be saved. I wanted to better understand this and get more information about how to be saved. I called Joel after church one Sunday afternoon and asked him to come over and see me. After he came, I bluntly asked him if he could tell me about what being saved meant and how could a person be saved. He explained as best he could as one 14-year-old boy to another 14-year-old. I felt I had just enough information to go from there. It must have been the next Sunday after that. I recall Brother Hall giving a sermon and telling how one could come to know Jesus Christ as one's personal Savior and be forgiven of his sins. I'd never stolen a car. I'd never murdered anybody. I never had robbed a bank. But somehow I knew I had sinned in my young life and needed Jesus to forgive my sins and save me. Brother Hall explained to me, the congregation, that day, if they felt Jesus was speaking to them about this, about coming to know Jesus as their personal Savior. And if you felt like you heard Jesus talking to you and convicting you, then that person was to come forward to receive Jesus Christ and be forgiven of sin and be saved. You'll have to understand now that I was the shyest boy in Dothan, Alabama. What? Me to go forward down that aisle between the pews to speak with Brother Hall about my salvation? Me? The shyest boy in Dothan? But just then the music began, and I believe the choir was singing just as I am. There must have been at least 1,000,000 people in that auditorium, and that meant that 2,000,000 eyes would be glued on this shy person if I stood up. But first, I had to get up and out of the pew, and my feet and legs were crying and saying, "Don't do it, don't do it." But that tug I sensed was far stronger than my emotions. And I went down that aisle to connect with Brother Hall's outstretched hand. He explained to me about what I needed to do, and I prayed to receive Jesus Christ as my Savior and in the forgiveness of sins. Yes, yes, it was right there in front of 1,000,000 people. I determined much later in my life that that was what I now call my first conversion, the most important one in a person's life while on planet Earth. I'll explain later what that meant. But after the service ended, I had to stand with Brother Hall at the door, leading out of the auditorium for everyone to greet me, congratulate me, and shake my hand. I seemed to lose all my fears by then. And I even asked Brother Hall if I could be baptized during that evening service. He explained to me the baptismal pool cannot be filled in the time we had available, and asked if the next Sunday would work for me to be baptized. And of course it did. After high school, there was more schooling and 4 years of service in the United States Air Force. During that time in the service, I married my high school sweetheart, Mary Elizabeth, the love of my life, who everyone now calls Lucky. She had just completed her 3-year curriculum at Grady Memorial Hospital School of Nursing to become a registered nurse. Then more education followed after the military ended. In fact, I discovered education never ends. Education never ends as long as our interests do not. In the education I received from high school through college, most of it was based on origins having occurred through evolutionary processes. Because I had no training in any of several colleges that I attended to counter origins by evolutionary progressions, I accepted what the teachers and white-coated professors taught. I was a Christian at the time and mistakenly believed that God had used evolution to create everything in the universe. Not knowing the term at the time, I would have been called a theistic evolutionist. Even into my 30s, I still believed in the false doctrine and religion of evolutionism. But I was a Christian, and God was working on his plan to change my thinking. The Lord apparently threw a switch to turn my life 180 degrees from a belief in evolutionism to one strongly based in biblical creationism. Because I had no training, I was still thinking as an evolutionist, but God was trying his best to change my thinking, and he swung it those 180 degrees. This occurred in the mid 1970s. How could that happen after so many years based in a secular foundation of origins to one totally opposite to that, one biblically and scientifically based? The Lord saw to it that rapid events occurred in my life to change my thinking. First, God got me into his word, the Bible, to see what actually is taught there about origins. Then God introduced me to two books, the Deluge Story in Stone and also the Genesis Flood by Doctors Henry M. Morris and John Whitcomb. These books describe the biblical scientific reasoning and scientific defense that destroy any support for evolutionism. Scales fell from my eyes as truths of God's creation poured into and filled my soul. This is the time I had the second conversion that I mentioned earlier. My first conversion was when I changed from being lost to salvation through Jesus Christ, my Savior. My second conversion was from a belief in evolutionism to one of biblical creationism. From all that, many changes came about in my life. The creation versus evolution controversy became hot in the news across the country, and interest was high in the media. From that, the Lord supplied invitations to teach biblical creationism and the Genesis flood to dozens of churches, homeschools, and organizations in several states. My wife and I traveled to Texas, Wyoming, and twice to Canada to engage in dinosaur excavations for our studies. We attended two meetings of explorers of Mount Ararat who were searching for the Ark of Noah. At one of these meetings, we actually met an eyewitness of Noah's Ark. While attending Calvary Bible Church in Huntsville, we became friends with Randall and Ellen Harris, who have been ministering with a Chinese church that met in Calvary's facility. The Harrises knew about my ministry of teaching on creation and asked if I could teach a class for the Chinese church if there was interest in the church. This led to the most joyous blessings that Lucky and I have enjoyed all of our lives since then. We're so thankful to the Lord that he gave us the many friends and loved ones in this wonderful church. How blessed we still are to have them as our special church family. And we love and enjoy being with you so very much. We always feel the warmth of God's Spirit when we're with you and the pleasure of having such sweet, lovely, wonderful friends. How gracious they have been all this time and asking me of all people to come and teach and work within the church that we've enjoyed so much. They have their own facility now, and you're very familiar with it. It's known as Huntsville Chinese Christian Church. And these 33 years, yes, 33 years associated with these treasured brothers and sisters mean so much to Lucky and me. All of these opportunities I've had to speak for the Lord came about only through God's calling and support. I could never have done what he has done for Lucky and me in our lives. May God receive any honor, any glory, and any praise, for he alone is worthy. To God be the glory. Thank you all for giving me this opportunity to be with you and give you my testimony. I hope it's shown my love of the Lord and his support